Well, hello, everyone. It's Thursday, September 24th. Welcome to The Matrix, Conversations and Transformations, a seminar series from the Department of Critical Theory and Social Justice at Occidental College. I'm Professor Moazem Doulat, and I'm joined by the co-organizers of the series, Professor Heldman, who's the chair of the department, and Professor Mary Christianakis. Professor Christianakis and Professor Heldman are co-founders of this series, and we're joined today by Professor Kai Small, who's co-hosting with us. We're very excited to have everyone with us there. So first, just a little bit about the series. If you haven't visited with us before, the series focuses on pressing current events and seeks to connect our community with experts, scholars, artists, and the most effective activists. You can register for upcoming events and access our YouTube channel, also embedded video on the website, at oxy.edu/matrix. Now, we're also on Instagram and Twitter. Both of them are CTSJ Oxy. Just one word. Join us there. So next Thursday, you can go register for this event. We'll be talking with Whitney Davis, a CBS employee who blew the whistle on racism and sexism in production studios. And Whitney Davis will be interviewed by Dr. Nicole Haggard. So that's coming up next. Please note we're using the webinar format. That means you can submit your questions at any time using the Q&A button right at the bottom of your screen towards the right. Okay, so at any time, just pop a question up there and we'll get to it either right then or towards the end of the show. We've reserved quite a bit of time for Q&A. And right now, I'd like to introduce Professor Kai Small from CTSJ, who's going to introduce our wonderful guest for today's show.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. We're so honored to have our guests today, the founders and co-hosts of Black Girl Film Club. So launched in 2018, Black Girl Film Club is a podcast aimed at creating a space for Black girls to watch and discuss movies. Hosts Ashley and Britney have reviewed and analyzed movies from such disparate genres as 1950s noir, Blaxploitation era films, and the best of Hong Kong cinema. Black Girl Film Club has been described as a unique and intimate experience and was recently listed on Lifehacker as one of the top 10 podcasts for discovering new movies. New episodes are produced twice monthly and are available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and SoundCloud. So individually, Ashley is an art director from Dallas, Texas. She grew up watching Disney animated movies, but became intensely interested in the art and technical side of filmmaking in her early 20s. She enjoys indie films, musicals, and the work of David Fincher. Britney is a part-time writer, full-time procrastinator from Cleveland, Ohio. Her love of film began back when Blockbuster Video roamed free. Not afraid to experiment with genres, she will watch anything. However, there's a special place in her heart for horror. You can find her discussing what she's watching on Twitter at its_Britney.
And I'll get us started off with questions. Thank you so much, Britney and Ashley, for joining us today in the Black Women in Hollywood series as part of The Matrix. Can you tell us a bit about the Black Girl Film Club? What inspired you to do this work, and what effect are you hoping to have on the media landscape? And let's start with you, Ashley.
Okay. So like we said, Black Girl Film Club started in 2018, but we actually started concepting and planning out the podcast in fall of 2017. So I guess to talk about the story of the podcast, you have to talk about our friendship. So myself and Britney, we've been friends for almost a decade, which is like, I don't know how long, half a century in internet speak, but we've connected primarily online. We've actually only met once in person. So, and we've connected pretty heavily with like pop culture. That's like what our friendship is based on. We talk a lot on Twitter, which is why when you listen to our episodes, we reference Twitter pretty heavily and things that are happening online. For me personally, and Britney can chime in, my kind of thinking started when I really got back into movies, probably like late 2016, and started reviewing things on Letterboxd, which is just like a fun website to just put some, track your movies. And I would notice, women would say, oh, I didn't like this movie, and this is why. And then it would just, pretty non-hostile, like pretty neutral reviews. And they would get bashed and harassed and have all these comments from men telling them they didn't understand the movie, or if they were like, no, I understood it, I just didn't like it, they're like, well, you're too dumb, or, just really awful things would happen. And then, of course, there's a lot happening in Hollywood as an industry, like with Harvey Weinstein and like some, one of the local theaters here on the Draft House, there was some really kind of sus things happening with people who run like their festivals, and it was a lot to kind of take in. And I was basically thinking like, God, like I wish there was a place where like me and my friends could just like talk about movies. Like we don't have to have anybody explain a movie to me because I watched the movie. I knew what I know what I felt, and I know what I saw. I interpreted it how I interpreted it. I don't need anybody else to tell me. And Britney, from her on her side, she listens to a lot of podcasts, a lot more movie podcasts than I do, and she would notice like certain film podcasts, they would review like a movie that was like a Black movie. I don't know, do you have like an example, Britney? Like
I listen to a lot of podcasts overall, and I grew up watching movies. I grew up as early as I can remember. One of my first memories was going to see Batman '89 in theaters. And it's one of my favorite movies. So I grew up in the movies, like going to see movies, watching movies at home with my parents. So it's part of who I am. And from that, I just always have loved watching movies. And I listen to a lot of like movie-based podcasts. Most of them are like bad movie podcasts. And what I noticed was that a lot of Black films are often featured on the bad movie podcast. And I noticed that sometimes they are bad because something is missing with like cultural nuances. Like you're not able to connect to like some of the culture because the podcasters aren't a part of the culture. And it's just something missing. It's just a disconnect. And I was thinking to myself, well, if like they're missing something. So I was like, well, if I hosted a podcast, like this movie isn't a bad movie. It's just like you're not getting the references made here. And if I was a podcast host, then I would be able to explain or be able to relate to the material a little bit better. And I really wanted to have a platform where I'm able to like discuss films a little bit more in depth. And I really wanted to discuss films with my friends. And specifically, I wanted to discuss films with Ashley, because Ashley is someone that likes films that are a little bit different from my taste of film. And we always like go back and forth about what we like. And I feel like I learn from her, and I feel like she learns from me. And I felt like it could create like an enriching experience. And from that, I feel like that's the basis of what Black Girl Film Club was born from and what it became.
Talk to us a little bit more about your different tastes in movies. And also please tell us how you first met, how you first connected.
Well, so my taste is like, it's all over the place, but I kind of live in more of the drama kind of indie realm. I really like a lot of foreign film. And Britney is more of a horror bae, I guess. So she loves a lot of like Eli Roth. You like a lot of classic horror. Britney will watch a lot of stuff. She's like, have you heard of this movie where this happens? I'm just like, who has watched that movie aside from you? So it helps because if it was just me, we'd just be talking about like, I don't know, like David Fincher or Agnes Varda or like, random French movies. And then with Britney, it would probably be like exclusively some wild, some wild plots. But I think with the both of us, like we kind of pushed each other to explore each other's like favorite genres a lot. We actually met through Tumblr. I don't know if Brittany remembers this. This is so long ago, but we met randomly on Tumblr. And I think from there, we both jumped to Twitter around the same time. We just kind of would connect about like music and stuff. And, you know, at the time, like live tweeting was pretty popular. So we would both be live tweeting like shows and like cracking up at each other's reactions. And yeah, I mean, that seems like really sort of like a weird way, I guess, to start a friendship, because like I said, we've only met once, and that was actually like a few years ago. I've literally been in the same room with Britney one time. And so just through like our love of like certain shows, certain movies, our individual humor, like we've connected way more. So we're actually really, really, really tight, despite our friendship being exclusively like online.
Yeah. Like I would say, like if you look at the catalog of episodes, you could kind of tell which movies I have picked and which movies that Ashley has picked. Like I would say, hey, let's do an episode on Serial Mom. And Ashley would say, let's do Amelie. And that's kind of like our style. And it works.
But you liked Amelie. That's
I did.
And I like Serial Mom. So see, we enriched each other.
Jump in and ask a question. I'm really fascinated by the fact that you all met online, and that your relationship really flourishes through the online space. And I've been thinking about, in one of the classes that I'm teaching this semester is about Black popular culture in the digital age, and how impactful this has been on the proliferation of Black media and film at this moment. And it makes me think about, you know, folks such as yourself who are deploying the digital space in ways that I think is making more room for and pushing and calling forth more Black film and media. And I was just wondering what your thoughts are on the relationship between this digital moment and the expansion of discussions and productions of Black film.
I mean, you can go, Brittany.
I believe like online spaces allow for more like creativity and allow for creatives to come together to create more projects. Like how me and Ashley connected, I've noticed like filmmakers connect with actors to create like small projects. We literally just witnessed one come together over the weekend with Marshawn Lynch. We witnessed a project come together. And I'm trying to find the filmmaker. I know her Twitter handle is Nina Serafina, I believe. Where she had her project was filmed, maybe it was this weekend or last weekend, but we have watched her work over the last couple years, really, through like an online space. And it's been great to like watch people like come together, like us, like other filmmakers, like writers, like screenwriters, and specifically Black creatives. We don't really have spaces everywhere, and online spaces have become like a comfort where we could get together and talk about like our experiences in a safe place and share what's going on, you know, comfort each other and really share ideas that may not be offered elsewhere.
Yeah. Also, I think too, like the online space has been really important, mainly because we don't live in like, you know, the hubs of entertainment. Like I live in Dallas and it's a pretty big city, but it's not known for filmmaking. Brittany lives in Ohio. They're not known for filmmaking. And so you know, it can be kind of a struggle, especially if you want to create your own thing. You'd probably think, oh, I need to move New York. Oh, I need to move LA. And that would help with certain things. I feel like, I mean, we're both not like filmmakers, so I can't really speak to how easy it is to like get resources unless you are in LA or New York. But for us as like podcasters, it really didn't, I mean, we're not really connected. We're not in the media. We're really just fans of movies, and we just have an opinion about them. And so without the internet, like I wouldn't even know Britney, you know? And so I don't know if we would have ever crossed paths. And because of the internet, as bad as it can be sometimes, and as stressful and as draining, like it's connected me with a bunch of cool people who kind of have the same interests as you do. I mean, for better or worse, you have almost a direct access to a lot of filmmakers. Like you can tweet them, or you can at least make your opinion heard, even if it feels like you're shouting into the void. You can still at least say it in front of like a wider audience than if you were just saying it to like, you know, 5 of your friends, you know, that you hang out with in your neighborhood. You know what I mean?
No, I really like this idea of creating a space for voices that are typically maybe shouted out into the void, right? And this idea that Brittany brought up of like reading reviews of movies and then understanding that the reviewers are out of touch with what maybe the filmmaker was intending, but also on the other end from the viewers of like, I didn't feel that way about a particular film that they may have really loved, right? So I appreciate a multiplicity of voices. And so your comment made me think about the power of media. And I don't mean only the films or the shows, but I mean of the media industry, right? The complex of it, the reviewers, the discussions online. Can you talk to us a little bit about the power of the media to shape values, to shape culture and perceptions? And in what ways do you think these representations matter in the daily lives of people and viewers?
I mean, I think it can be argued that media is super powerful for a variety of reasons, for good reasons, for bad reasons. Even in the last, I would say 5-6 years, you can just see it in who is starring in movies, the types of movies that are being greenlit, who is directing movies. I mean, you have something like the undeniable effect of like Black Panther, you have, you know, Us and Get Out. You have like the smaller screen. I think the smaller screen is really where a lot of noticeable change is happening, because you've got like Issa Rae, you've got things like I May Destroy You by Michaela Cole. Like you have a lot happening in media. I think it can be, like for me personally, I don't always feel like I need to see my exact story on screen to connect with something, connect with a movie. I can kind of, you know, pick and choose, like, okay, I can see myself in this, even though like the character might not look like me or grow up like me necessarily, but maybe the personality is the same. But for a lot of people, it's you know, it can be very discouraging not to see yourself on screen. It can be very overly almost insulting in a way when you see some of the movies. You're just like, again, we're doing this again. And I mean, you have children too. You know, when you see yourself from a young age, it completely affects how you view yourself. And of course, just because you see yourself doesn't mean it's always a positive representation. I think as we're moving forward with like different initiatives of like representation and trying to include or be more inclusive on screen at the Oscars, like things like that, I think representation isn't always going to be enough. I feel like the right representation, or more of an inclusive representation, will also be important, because you can have a Black character on screen, but you can almost always tell when it was written by a Black person versus when it was written by somebody else, because they either do things that were like, we wouldn't do that. Or you have situations where, you know, they'll try to kind of, I don't know, like check a box almost, where it is like, okay, you got your white girl here, you got your black girl here, you got your Asian kid here. Like, you can tell it should feel more organic. And I feel like that only happens when you have like black writers in the room, black directors, you know, black people behind the scenes, which that can be really hard because, again, it speaks to resources, it speaks to who has access to these types of spaces. But as far as media goes, I mean, it's been hugely important. Like, you can't deny that it's hugely important. You can't, I mean, even if you watch a movie like that's set in New York and you don't see any people of color, you don't see any black people, it's completely obvious because that's nearly impossible unless you're like in a very, very exclusive part of New York. What say you, Brittany? I know you have something to say.
I agree. Like, it matters. Like, representation matters. The media can influence like how people see themselves. Like, it influences standards of beauty. It influences like how like if you don't see a person of color or a black person in something, like it's almost like that person doesn't matter on the grand scheme of things. So these things do matter, and you know, creators have to be more mindful about that, and you have to think about more when creating these characters. You have to think about the types of characters that you create. It can't just be one thing. Like, it can't just be one thing always.
Yeah, I think you also can't pigeonhole like a character into certain, like, you can't just drop a black character in and say, okay, is everything's gonna make sense now? Like, aren't you happy? And so it feels like that at times. I know there's been like a lot of online discussion about like Netflix and how, you know, they'll put a black girl in a movie, but it's almost always a lighter skinned black girl. There's never usually any darker skinned actresses that are included. Everybody kind of almost looks like copies of each other. And so then you start to think like, you know, who are you doing this for? Are you trying to make it like, are you trying to appease these outcries while also trying to make yourself feel better because like you don't have, you know, you can, it almost feels like you're trying to appease to both sides, like the mainstream and like what's like acceptable beauty standards for them, and then what's, you know, like I feel like you really, like Brittany said, you really have to have a lot of care. You have to have a lot of almost like a lot of background knowledge. Like, if you have a black character, not to say that you can't write a black character if you're not a black person, but you just have to, you definitely have to have like a lot of care and a lot of nuance. And it's not going to be just as easy as just sort of, you know, paint by numbers.
That's great. So, I'm sorry, Kai, do you have a follow-up? I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I was wondering about and thinking about and looking at and listening to your different episodes and the breadth of films that you engage with, that both talks about Black films and then also films that are ostensibly maybe coded as non-Black films, but kind of I think this model that you all have developed, and how it opens up questions about how certain films and filmmakers are marketed in ways that limit both Black women's representation, but also how Black women are imagined as audience members. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on that, and specifically on the choices made around this plethora of films that you're engaging.
I feel like Black women as an audience for films are largely ignored. We watch films. We watch all kinds of films, and sometimes we are missed as a market. Sometimes like you would think that it would just be one type of film that you would want to watch. And it could be a certain type of film that you're like constantly marketed to. And we are like consistently marketed to like maybe romances or romantic comedies or like family dramas and things like that, but that may be limited, like limiting the types of movies that we might actually enjoy. And with like the type of films that we watch on the podcast, we challenge like each other in the types of films that we watch. And for like me personally as a film, like someone like a film watcher, I don't know the appropriate term, but like for someone who watches films, I take it as a personal challenge to challenge the type of films that I want to watch. Like, I don't like Westerns at all, but one day I might say, hey, let me just see what this Western is talking about to see if it could be something that I could potentially watch and see whether I like it. And I feel like maybe more film goers could possibly do that just to see, like, challenge your boundaries from time to time and see what could happen. You might find something that you might like, or you might find something that you don't like. But overall, I feel like a lot of people keep Black women as an audience in a box. And it also limits Black directors, Black women directors, and they keep them in a certain box. You don't get as many opportunities. We've seen that. And once a film doesn't go as planned, they may not get another opportunity. Me and Ashley kind of discussed this and we wanted to talk about it. And that comes with something I was really, really looking forward to as a horror fan. And that is Nia DaCosta's Candyman. And how, like, with all the hype around it, the whole time it was marketed as like, it was Nia DaCosta's Candyman. She's the director of it. But when referred to it, we've attached Jordan Peele's name on it. Mm. He's not the director. It's not his film. His production company is behind it, but it's not his film. So it is taking her name off of it. It's kind of removing her association away from it likely because she's a woman. But we can't like prove it, but likely. And it is limiting her chances. They're kind of like keeping her in the box. But this is a major project, especially in the horror community, because women aren't really respected as horror fans. Black women aren't really respected as horror fans. You're constantly challenged about how much horror knowledge you have. If you can't name every single Friday the 13th movie or every single A Nightmare on Elm Street movie, then you're just not a real horror hound. And it's kind of corny, but that's just the way things are. So this film had like really big potential and I was so excited for it, and it's been pushed back until 2021. Can't wait to see
like
it.
Everything else.
Yeah, like I can't wait to see it. So like that's just one thing. Like you're taking away like something from a woman to put a man's name on it, because like, yes, Jordan Peele has the credentials. He is responsible for Us and Get Out, but that's not his film. This is someone else's. And I understand the credentials it lends to Candyman, and I understand why it would give it more push in the horror community, but overall it's not his film.
Got it. So Britney, if you don't mind me asking, what is it about the horror genre that's so interesting to you besides, I mean, I can't handle them. I freak out at the slightest scary anything, but besides the thrill of it, is there something about them that interests you?
For me, it's challenge, like it pushes boundaries. It pushes, for me, like certain films pushes boundaries on like filmmaking. It pushes boundaries on like what constitutes a good and bad film. And some are just kind of like fun, like it makes good popcorn movies.
Yeah. So I had read something at some point. This is not my area, but I'd read something at some point that horror genres are actually extremely effective political narratives, right? More effective
Yes.
than great political narratives. Is that something that you like about them, or?
Yes, like honestly, one of my favorite horror movies is Night of the Living Dead by by Romero.
Yeah.
So it is from the late 60s. It has a really interesting history. It is an accidental social commentary because it was technically blind casted. Dwayne Jones was not like selected for the lead of the film because he was a Black man. He was selected because he was the best actor for the role. And he became the hero of the movie. If you've ever seen the film, he's the hero of the movie. If you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend it. And it's about zombies in Pittsburgh. And at the end of the film, an angry mob of largely white people come for the house that everyone has been protecting themselves in throughout the like zombie invasion, essentially. And he is the last person alive in the house, and he is trying to scream for help, and he is murdered by the mob. And that says a lot. Like if you read it from a socio-political standpoint, is he murdered because they think he's potentially a zombie, or is he murdered because he's a Black person? So horror is a genre that says a lot. It has a lot of political commentary, a lot of social commentary, especially Romero's work. Like we have Night of the Living Dead, we have Dawn of the Dead, we have Day of the Dead. They say a lot of things. Zombie movies, for the most part, they're great subgenre to visit when you want to like think about things sometimes.
Yeah.
So that's another reason why I do like horror.
Yeah.
Britney, I love horror too, and I love it for for like the monsters in it, because I think they really push our imaginations and really connect to the monsters of real life, right? Like mobs like that, the monsters that keep us up at night, that are really us, right? That are really the people. Yeah.
And the tensions around precisely in the Night of the Living Dead of how Blackness is constructed as a monstrosity socially, and these different plays on both the way Mary's invoking monstrosity and then also like Blackness being the monstrosity. I was wondering too, and I know that this is on our agenda to talk about, the simple question is if y'all are watching Lovecraft Country, and you know, as you're speaking to this kind of like burgeoning presence of Black storytelling in TV. Both just your thoughts on Lovecraft Country, but then also this question of like the genre crossing of film and television.
Yeah, I mean, Black Girl Film Club is sometimes also Black Girl TV Club. We watch a lot of TV. Sometimes it'll come out on the podcast, but we also go off track a lot. So we try to keep it to film. We're both watching Lovecraft Country. I don't know, are you caught up? Did you watch?
Yeah, I'm caught up.
Yeah, okay, so yeah, we're both caught up. I've never read the book. One of our friends, shout out Davlin, don't know if you're in, but hey girl, she has read the book, so she kind of knows a lot more, but we kind of look like, hey, she's like, no, yeah, it's apparently it's skewing a little bit from the book, but it's also following a pretty close story structure in terms of like being an anthology within a series. So I thought like the first episode was probably the strongest, just like if you're talking about like the use of monsters, like the monsters were really not the scariest part of the first episode by a long shot. Like the part of them driving through a sundown town, because I was also very surprised to hear people say, "Oh, there's such a thing as sundown towns." It's like it's not a word. It still is. There's several sundown towns in Texas. There's several places that I hope I never get caught in driving, and that was probably the most terrifying part, because you know what could happen historically if they were caught, and they were. The monsters were kind of like an afterthought almost in that situation, and I was like, oh, this is cakewalk. The other stuff is way scarier. I don't know, as far as some of the other episodes, I mean, it's been kind of a roller coaster, because I'm genuinely like, I never really know what's gonna happen. I had no idea, like this past episode, don't want to like spoil it, but it was like a completely different setting and take, like a completely different perspective on the overall story. And it was definitely it dealt with more monstrous things. It dealt with like girls as monsters, which I think is an interesting take in horror, because I mean, I'm not a horror expert like Brittany, so chime in if I'm getting it wrong, but like I think the whole like girls as monsters metaphor can be really interesting depending on who it's coming from. If it's coming from a man, I usually don't like it because it kind of feels almost like it's veering towards misogyny. But like the whole like for instance, we watched the movie Raw. We've never talked about it, but it's been a pretty interesting, we've hinted at talking about it, but it's just so gross, so I don't know if we'll ever get to it. But that's like sort of like the same sort of subject matter, where like girls hit puberty and all of a sudden they're kind of like this ravenous kind of creature. And I think that it's very interesting depending on how you've been, I guess, what box you've been placed in as a girl. If you've been placed in sort of like the sweet, nice box, that's probably very liberating to see, girls turn into monsters and kind of really release that rage. And if you've always been stereotyped as a monster, then it might not hit the same way for you, might hit a little different. So, but I'd love to know your take, Brittany, because we've talked about it a little bit, but not in depth.
Lovecraft Country. I'm all caught up. It was the first episode is the strongest, like Ashley said. I felt like that was a really effective episode. It was very difficult to watch in some portions because it had a lot of relatable fears, especially doing like some driving. I'm from Ohio, but I went to school in the South. So sometimes, like if you're driving by yourself as a woman, through some parts, going on a trip, like it can be a little scary from time to time. But overall, like it's an interesting show. I'm still working through my feelings overall, especially about Lovecraft as a writer, because historically Lovecraft is a writer who has some issues with Black people, and his work is a foundation for a lot of the genre itself. So to be a horror fan, it's very complicated, but overall Lovecraft Country is a show to watch. But it's, yeah.
It's not boring. I'll give it that. Sometimes I'm like, whoa, where are we going with this? But also, I feel like at least I feel like once the whole story is told, then maybe you can go back. Because even like just talking to Brittany and like other friends, there's been stuff I've missed. There's so much to look at. There's so much to like, oh, this means something, but you're kind of watching individual stories with the same characters. So for me at least, it can be kind of hard to like connect all the dots. Brittany's way better at connecting all the dots than I am. So
Yeah, we have our little.
yeah, our little our little suspect wall, like who's who and what's going on here. And so I think I don't really know how many episodes it's supposed to be either, but I'm hoping once it all comes together that it'll be like a clearer picture. It is a J.J. Abrams production though, so like there's a good chance it won't come together, even though, you know, we don't even know if it's going to be like a multi-season thing. It could end like Watchmen. So, yeah.
Yeah, just to, I guess I was remiss for our audience of giving the context of this show from on HBO that's really playing with in a lot of the ways that Brittany was highlighting before and has come up in the conversation, the horror of anti-Black racism, with the horror we associate with monsters. And as you both poignantly said in that first episode, the monstrous, multi-eyed, looming, what are they, Shoggoths or something, are the least kind of terrifying aspects of this episode, when the Black characters are actually confronted with the horror and terror of white supremacy, and the different ways that that's played on throughout the seasons, but also create these really, I'm thinking particularly about the episode that focused on Ruby, these really gory and unsettling imagery that you're unsure of what to make of it. Like, is it, how much of it is a critique of anti-Blackness and how much of it is itself gorging on and depending on certain imageries of Black women to make it make sense. But yeah, I think it's a fascinating and speaks to the point Malik was making, and my own shared fascination along with a Black feminist colleague of mine who does her work in horror, why it's such a poignant genre for thinking about Blackness, anti-Blackness, monstrosity, and troubling both the horrors we've become, far too much of society has become used to, and the exceptional. So,
Yeah, that episode was very, when it first started, I think I yelled out loud, no, I don't like this. I don't like this, especially with like a lot of things that are coming up on the news lately about people, white women pretending to be Black women and getting ahead in like the academic space. I was like, no, I want to turn this off, but we're going to keep pushing through. But like my first reaction, probably for the first like 15, 20 minutes, I was like, no. I don't want to see any more of this. But yeah, it's very interesting how it plays like monstrosity and Blackness and who are the monsters and who, you know, by society standards, who's monstrous and who isn't.
So we have a question actually in the Q&A that has to do with horror. And the question is asking if you could touch on the frequent brutalization of Black bodies in horror films and media in general. Do you think that it is effective or is it re-traumatizing? Sorry, I'm reading the question right now. Assuming it can be strictly one or the other, or right, it could be both. We see a lot of movies about historical violence inflicted on Black people, but not many about joy, beauty, diversity, etc. Part of what students are talking about in Black popular culture with Professor Small is the consumption of Black violence for the pleasure of white viewers. So could you speak to that, the brutalization of Black bodies, the relationship to joy?
It's overwhelming. Like at the moment, like I do love horror movies. I have not watched too many horror movies lately, because of everything that is going on. You, we've seen it constantly, day to day, every day, our entire lives, like for me and Ashley, like our entire lives. And it's overwhelming. And I feel like the media right now is doing, I want to say they're doing a lot. For example, like with watching the news, the warnings on the news aren't sufficient enough. They say that they're going to provide a warning for the graphicness of the news that they're about to show you, but then they show you it anyway, and they don't give you enough time to possibly prepare yourself or change the channel, and they show it to you anyway. And it can be like a triggering situation. Or if you're on social media, it's just a constant barrage of violence against Black people, constantly. And it's overwhelming, and you don't have time to breathe. You don't have time to just unplug. And you want to be aware of what's going on in the world, because without that information, you feel a little lost, but it seems like something is happening every day, because something is happening every day. And I guess I value the information, because now we're at a time with our like phones, we can see it happen in real time. We can record it. We can we could share that information instantaneously, and we have proof of it. Whereas like in the past, it will take a while for the information to be disseminated. But with that instantaneous dissemination, it's overwhelming. And it's just a lot to process, and we're constantly processing, and we're constantly grieving, and it's a lot. So for me, in my horror love, I just have taken a moment to just take a step back, because the Black person is typically the first person to go. There are very few Black final girls. There are very few Black final boys. That's just the way that it is. With the exception of a couple movies, like for example, like Brandy and I Still Know What You Did Last Summer. And I don't want to liken what's happening in the real world to like a horror movie or anything like that, because the real world is a horror now. Like everything is horrible, guys. I'm sorry. It is. Everything is bad. Everything is bad. But we everything is bad. But
I mean, I think what Britney is also trying to say is like, because we live online so much, it can be really hard. For me, I feel like people share information, share videos under the guise of kind of helping, but that can also be harmful. And it goes back to sort of nuance and understanding of the audience at large, because I mean, for me and for Britney and for our friends, like this isn't new. This isn't shocking anymore, as shocking as that might sound. It's pretty reoccurring. For other people, it might be the first time you've ever heard of this or seen something like this, but the wider proliferation of like these videos and of course like autoplay is like evil at this time. So like it can be a lot. As far as it connecting to horror movies, I mean, I feel like I've seen, what was it, Midsummer was maybe the first movie that we watched where like, well, like I mean, spoilers, nothing good happens. Almost nothing good happens in Midsummer, but there is actually a Black character there with a purpose. Like, it wasn't just fodder. He wasn't just like the first to get like booted off. But yeah, it can be overwhelming to just see so much death all the time. And I know, like, Britney is definitely more, she watches way more horror movies than I do. I typically stick to the month of October for my horror movies. But I feel like it can be, yeah, like it can be a lot. And if you do share these videos, if you're kind of one who just kind of like, have you seen this? And there's a lot of almost baiting. People kind of share these videos, like, I know like there's certain Black Twitter users with like very high followings. People will try to DM them and say, oh, have you seen this? And I'm like, that's traumatizing. That's very traumatic. It's not fictional. It's something that's happening in real life that could happen to me, could happen to Britney. Like, that's very much like, you know, at the back of my mind, sometimes at the forefront of my mind. That's super traumatic. And yeah, I feel like the way the media treats violence against Black people is almost like they're watching sport a lot of time.
Or a movie, like you can distance yourself from it. Like it's not real, like it's not happening, like it's fictional, like they're characters in the movie instead of people.
Do you all feel, I mean, I'm thinking about, and returning to this conversation of how in a Black director, in a Black writer's hands, it becomes a site for a different kind of response and articulation, to differently make meaning of and disrupt how violence is shown against Black bodies. So I'm thinking of like some of the films we've already cited. I think there's this interesting moment in Us with the white family that they're friends with and how swiftly they're all killed in that imagery on scene versus the juxtaposition of with the Black family, and kind of what you feel or see when Black folks take on horror, or how they're negotiating this larger field in which we're already constantly exposed to a brutalization of Black bodies, that there becomes a different way to tell stories or create or show violence, horror, or even, I'm even thinking about like in Queen and Slim, like the different ways that there's an approach from Black folks in negotiating all of the feelings and the trauma and the reclaiming that comes up.
Well, we haven't watched Queen and Slim yet. We're thinking about it. We haven't done it quite yet. I haven't seen it personally. I don't know if you saw it yet, Brittany.
Not yet.
Yeah, I think within a Black director or Black writer's hands, like, it's not always perfect. There's definitely, like, we've critiqued Jordan Peele's work. We've talked about, I feel like we talked about Us. I don't know if we talked about Get Out. So it's not like a perfect shining example. There's plenty of room for misstep, but I feel like there's also, you know, you can put your own personal experience in the characters that you're writing, in the story that you're telling. It's not just kind of, you know, as an afterthought that these characters are Black, so, you know, this person gets killed off, so oops, there they're gone. Like, there's a lot more thought behind it, I would like to think. I don't know how you feel about it, Brittany, but that's my general take, is that I feel like when there's at least more Black people in the room, there's, you know, because sometimes things end up on film, you're like, we're no Black people in the room. Where nobody stopped and said, you shouldn't do this. Like, we can tell how many Black writers or any writers that you have in the room. But then, yeah, I mean, it's not a perfect system, or it's not a perfect, I mean, it could work, you know, like it could, it could make some really great stories. Just the films you mentioned, I feel like the perspective is a lot different than if somebody white had written Us or had written Get Out. Or, I mean, if you take trauma into like a love story, like If Beale Street Could Talk, that's a pretty traumatic story, but it's not done in like an over the top sort of way where there's just like so much violence. There's violence in it, but it's not done in disservice of the story. It's not like, oh, there's so much to, it's not gross. It's, I feel like in the wrong hands, definitely stories that could have a lot of nuance are not told in a very nuanced way, but I'll let you have it too, Brittany.
Yeah, I know we have a limited time, but I would say I'm thinking about Barry Jenkins and how like some of his movies do contain some violent moments, and he handles his movies and some of the themes in them with such great care, because he cares about the stories that are being told, and he wants to share those stories with us with that care. So I would say that yes, it's going to be a different level of care, but it also depends on the director's intent and the director's relationship to the story.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. We're heading out, but we got some really great questions in the Q&A for you as well. I just wanted to, maybe if you could take just a few seconds and encourage some of our students based on your experiences. So something very simple here, which is you've intervened, right, in a media landscape that you thought was limiting and problematic, and you're doing it in your way. Do you have any advice for young people out there who are looking at this world? You said it's not great. Can I be understated there? It's not great out there. Things that they might do or ways they might approach it or how they might think about intervening as we head out?
I mean, for us, we kind of just got up and did it, which sounds really like pull yourself up by your bootstraps. I hate that. But I feel like there's a lot of resources out there to do what you want to do. For us, it's been definitely a learning curve. So I wouldn't say, rest and wait till it's the perfect time or the perfect moment, the perfect medium. We definitely struggled in I feel like our first year, we kind of had it was an extreme learning curve. We learned kind of on the way of producing episodes. We've taught ourselves a lot. So I definitely think if, the most important thing to me has been, don't think that you can't say anything just because somebody else is possibly saying it. We know people who were way more popular than us on the internet, have way more followers. Their voice reaches a wider audience, but that hasn't stopped us from getting our opinions out there and finding other people who share those opinions and share our insight. Analyzing movies is pretty fun, and we found other people who also like the way, or they've said, I never would have considered watching this movie, but just hearing y'all talk about it has made me interested. And that's been a big part of why I think we continue to do what we do. But anybody who wants to create, I think, don't let the sea of voices stop you from making what you want to make, because there's always going to be someone out there who's like, oh, I found this great thing. It's so cool. They're talking to me. And I feel like, I know you guys. So yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, and my advice would be do it. If you want to do something, if it's in your heart, do it. Go for it. No one is going to stop you but you. So that would be my advice.
Yeah. And don't worry about falling on your face either. That's the other thing. I feel like people kind of worry about, oh, well, this look dumb. And it's just kind of like, if you take the attitude of like, well, I'm doing it and this is what I would want to see, then I feel like the things that you make will be much better aligned and you'll be much happier with what you created versus worrying about, what this person that might not be listening, even this audience that you don't have, don't necessarily always do everything for everybody else around you. Kind of please yourself and you'll start to please other people.
That's amazing. Thank you both so much for taking time to talk to us, our students, our audience today. You're incredible. Your work is great. I'm going to say thank you and let our students go back. Kai's leaning in.
Oh, I just wanted to say thank you very much. I've been a fan, so it's been a pleasure to be in conversation.
So
Thank
thank you
you
guys
so
for
much.
having me.
Thank you,
Yeah,
guys.
thank you for having us.
Follow them at two places. Black Girl Film Club on Twitter.
BLK Girl Film Club.
There you go. And they have a Tumblr as well, which is really fun. Check that out. And if you go to if you have a hard time spelling it, I retweeted their recent tweets. They're at the top of the CTSJ Oxy Twitter feed. And there you go. Thank you both so much. Keep doing it. We love it. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Bye,
Bye, thank
everybody.
you.